is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video. In this one, I'm going to be building an awesome 1440p based gaming PC build that is ready to smash through basically all of the latest AAA titles. I've picked out some really great parts that make this build fantastic for now and into the future, and I also think that once it's put together, it should look the part. I'll be running you guys through, as always, all the components I chose and why, including some alternative options. I'll be showing you how to put it together step by step from start through to the finish, and then I'll be looking at performance a little bit later in a detailed gaming benchmark section. So what are we waiting for? Let's build a gaming PC. I've got to give a massive shout out to... Too excited. Calm down, James. Calm down. To APNX for sending out their new C1 and helping make today's video possible. They're like a new premium spin-off of the Aerocool brand, which we've used and liked on the channel before. So I'm excited to see how this quite heavy, very cool mid-tower case performs a little bit later. As always, though, the first port of call is to go ahead and get some of our components assembled out of the case, starting specifically with the CPU, motherboard, RAM, and SSD. It doesn't take a genius to work out that I've gone for a Ryzen-based system in this build today, and it's something that I'm finding myself doing increasingly more and more at the moment. With Intel 14th gen having turned out to be a bit of an underwhelming affair and Ryzen prices cheaper than ever, I've picked up the Ryzen 7 7700X, but feel free to swap this out for the Ryzen 5 7600X if you're only really bothered about gaming and aren't after the extra cores for a bit more multitasking performance and, dare I say it, a little bit of future-proofing. I'll be installing this into one of the best value X670 motherboards around. It is, of course, the GeekaByte Aorus X670 Elite. Taking a look at the motherboard, and you'll quickly notice the AM5 socket, dual-channel DDR5 memory support, PCI Gen 5 for the SSD, couple more Gen 4 NVMe's, and of course, our X16 slot we need of the Gen 4 variety for the graphics card. It's even got this cool little, more basic PCIe latch that makes it a bit easier to uninstall the GPU. It's always best to get the CPU installed nice and early, not only because it's one of the more delicate parts of the process, but it obviously protects the pins on the socket and the CPU itself. In many ways, the safest place for the CPU to be is actually installed into the motherboard. Memory-wise, I'll be installing 32 gigs of Kingston's Fury Beast. They do a slightly higher-end kit called the Renegade, which I was going to include today, but we want to try and keep a little bit of a lid on costs and make this a really great value and great performing gaming PC build. I always want the builds on the channel to look the part, but they need to also stack up when it comes to the cost department too, and I'll leave latest pricing and availability links as always in the description below. So that's the RAM in, that's the CPU in. Next is the M.2 drive. Now, where is this? Here it is. I've gone ahead and picked up the Corsair MP600GS. This is a 2TB NVMe, really super cheap. NVMe drives have come down in cost so much in recent years that going for a 1 or 2 TB drive even is really easy in modern builds. This has speeds in the region of about 5 GB a second, so way faster than Gen 3, but not the quickest Gen 4 around. I'm not actually going to install the SSD into this top slot as you might expect. I'm actually going to install it into one of these second or third slots, as this PCI 5 one is best left for later. Say you want to add a PCI Gen 5 SSD, why take up the top slot when you simply don't need to? So 3 screws removes the heatsink, drive pops in, and the heat shield goes back on. If you've got a drive with an inbuilt heatsink, you will need to use the top slot and then not put the heatsink back on that came included with the motherboard. So that's looking pretty good, and I'm hoping he's going to match the build quite nicely later. The only other thing I would always recommend at this stage is taking a look at the cooler. Now, I've selected this. It's brand new. It's the MSI Core Liquid E360. Now, you've got 3 120mm ARGB fans, an ARGB block, everything kind of as you would expect for a 360mm, but MSI coolers are traditionally very, very price competitive, which I like to see. The cooler itself comes wrapped in this sort of protective cardboard that stops your radiator getting damaged in shipping. Of course, our 3 RGB fans included as standard. There must be a reason these are all packaged in individual plastic. It seems like a waste environmentally to me, but I'm sure there's a reason for it. And then the rest of the cooler, look at that. It's nice little water block. Oh, you know what? That looks pretty groovy. I like the look of that. Now, the reason I'm getting it out is not just so I can go, ooh, that looks quite nice, and yes, ooh, I'd put that in my build. It's so I can see what the mounting situation is. Right, so this little bag answers my question. These included brackets actually use the pre-installed plastic brackets on the motherboard. So it means there isn't actually any prep needed now with the radiator, but it's always worth checking as it varies massively on a cooler by cooler basis. And now I've established that, I'm gonna get rid of this. I'm not actually going to throw it. So instead, I'm going to look at the case. And this, as alluded to earlier, is the brand new APNX C1. And it's a little bit different to the kind of cases that you might be used to seeing, which is what makes me quite excited. Ugh. The colour is a bit of a giveaway straight away. And I personally think that it looks absolutely sick. Now, I have taken a look at this case already, explored some of the feature sets, and to say that this is made by kind of the same people who made Aerocool chassis, and it looks this good is kind of insane. Not because Aerocool cases were necessarily always bad, they were just budget and you knew about it. So let me show you around this thing, and it is a little bit different. So the front panel is all mesh, which is obviously good, it's what we like to see. That mesh then bleeds round in one piece to the back, which is kind of cool. Then at the rear, you've got room for, don't know what this is, presumably like hard drives and SSDs. The power supply obviously goes at the bottom where you would expect. And then looking at the internals, you've got obviously support for full-size ATX motherboards, an integrated GPU support bracket, and a trio of 140mm ARGB fans at the front with a singular 120mm ARGB fan at the back. Now, I really like the fact that it comes with 4 fans and the front are all 140s. There's also room for a 360mm rad at the top, which we'll be taking advantage of with, of course, that MSI cooler. It's just very nice. And I think the colorway looks absolutely insane. So great work, Aerocool. Something a bit different. Integrated RGB controller, decent I/O with USB-C. Build quality feels super solid. Even like the case feet are quite modern and just a little bit different with this one big piece that allows the front to feel really like one kind of complete item. It's very nice and very different. Gonna lay the case down flat as I always do to install the motherboard. All the screws you need come in this little box, which is included with the chassis. The motherboard is a neutral aesthetic to try and leave the color of the case to really show itself off without any distractions. Try to find blue and purple color shift parts to match a blue and purple color shift case is quite difficult, very difficult. So I went neutral. Now's also a sensible time to go ahead and get all the fans for the radiator on the rad before screwing the rad into the case. The rad's going to go at the top for me with the fans pulling air out in exhaust, which will help to neutralise 3 140mm intakes at the front for fairly neutral air pressure all around. A little bit of thermal paste onto the Ryzen processor. I'm kind of struggling to use the tiny thermal paste syringe. There we go. Don't worry if you make a little bit of a mess of it. The main thing is that you just don't want to put too much on there. Then it's just a case of getting those latches over. So bottom latch and then the top latch, lovely stuff. Just tighten these up with your thumbs. It's really not too complicated, I suppose. And you can see as it becomes tighter and tighter and tighter, it's just going to grip on that a little bit better and make better and, whoa, the case front panel came off there. It's going to make better and better contact with the actual CPU. Then the top water block is rotatable and the MSI logo is pointing the right way around. Bit of a discreet, stealthy design, which I like. A couple of cables to tidy away and then we should be good to go. And then it's time for, I think, probably the graphics card. Now, for the GPU, I've picked up the GeekaWhat AMD RX 7800 XT. This is one of the more MSRP-ish options. I'll leave it linked down below. For Newegg and Amazon, they are affiliate links. 16 gigs of VRAM, more performance than the 4070. In some instances, more performance than the 4070 Ti. And despite what a lot of people are saying, I think it's a lot better value than the 6800 XT. A card which often costs basically the same, but this is going to give you 10-15% more performance. Yes, AMD could have done more for generation to generation performance gains, but it's still a really great card. And for 1440p gaming, you honestly cannot go wrong. Unless Nvidia pulls something magic out of the bag with RTX 5000, which I can't really see them doing at this point, I think we're simply going to see AMD and Radeon get more and more dominant and increase their market share in the Steam hardware survey and, of course, in global sales figures. Or at least that's my prediction. I could be wrong. GPU-wise, it is a bit boring, it is a bit bland, but it has got some RGB. It's not badly designed, it's just not particularly exciting, but it will work well in the case and isn't going to sort of obstruct, I suppose, some of the other aesthetic options. Just looking, and the GPU mount needs to move down a bit, so for that, I've got to take the top panel back off so that I can then remove this front panel, and then I can get access to the GPU support bracket at the rear. It's a case of removing the second and third PCI slot covers here. So there's the first one, and then the second. These do feel a little bit flimsy and cheap, but what is otherwise a really quite high quality case in my opinion. But I suppose they are only slot covers, and if there's going to be any area of the case that could take some improvement, I suppose, the PCI slot covers, it's not a bad one to have to fix later. There we go. Bit of pressure. I'm going to screw it in first and then put the GPU support bracket up afterwards, just so that we can find our natural resting place. Then simply a case of popping on the top and the front panels back for the second time. Should have left them off really, shouldn't I? Top plate. Marvellous, marvellous, marvellous. One more part left to go, and then the build is basically done. And that is this down here. The Coolmaster V750i Gold. 750 watts, intelligent, ATX 3.0 with the PCI Gen 5 power connector. Happy days. Not that we actually need it because it's a Radeon build, but it's always nice to have for future, I suppose. Also going to pop in a couple of cable extensions while I do this, just to finish and polish the whole build off quite nicely. And with that, we've got a PC that I think looks pretty good, but we don't know how this is all going to work with the RGB on, the fan spinner, and everything booted and ready to go. So let's take a look in the only way we know how, and then I'll rejoin you for some gaming benchmarks. It is, of course, time for a GeekaWhat montage. Let's go, baby. Oh, baby, a triple.
Oh, baby, a triple.
As far as performance goes, it should be pretty good inside of this APNX C1. All of that extra airflow is going to help keep components cool and allow the 7800 XT to push to the max. Let's start off, shall we, with a tricky test, Starfield at 1440p high settings. Here the 7800 XT achieved 83 FPS on average, with consistent 90 and 99th percentiles. If you wanted a more competitive frame rate in Starfield, you could drop down to 1080p, but remember, it's a notoriously difficult game to run, and as continual driver and game optimizations come to light, performance should only improve. Hogwarts Legacy is next at 1440p high settings. Here the build pulled in 113 FPS on average, with 101 and 84 for the 90 and 99th percentiles. Hogwarts Legacy, another AAA title that shows the 7800 XT really does have prowess at 1440p, and is kind of our go-to 1440p card right now. Warzone 2 at 1440p only pushes this argument further. High settings with AMD FSR enabled and set to quality. That's basically AMD's render scaling equivalent to DLSS. And here the build achieved 148 FPS on average. 136 and 129 for 90 and 99th percentile numbers rounded off a good set of results. Fortnite was next at 1080p competitive settings. We always tune down to competitive at 1080p in Fortnite to see what the maximum frame rate upside the build can achieve is. And of course test out that CPU bottleneck. Here the build pulled in 302 FPS on average with consistent 90 and 99th percentile results that leads you having to buy a very expensive monitor to really take advantage of all this frame rate. Rounding things off in Apex Legends, the build at 1440p high pulled in 236 FPS. Wow! AMD cards consistently perform very, very well in Apex Legends with good 90 and 99th percentiles too. What do I think of this build though? I quite like the APNX C1. I like they're doing something a bit different. The colorway's pretty interesting, and the wider build of course performs very, very well indeed. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to get subscribed, drop a like rating. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.